it was, so I'm just going to get rid of this recording message. So there was something called concurrent authority in the old Local Government Act, and essentially the same thing as we have now in the Building Act that restricted local governments from regulating something that was already regulated by the code. But when we did create our new legislation, the Building Act, of course, the legal advice was just a little bit different than it was many, many years ago when the Local Government Act was created. And so the language became a bit more specific. And it's what we often refer to now as Section 5 of the Building Act, which essentially does the same thing as concurrent authority did. If something is regulated by the building code, then it cannot be regulated by local governments. And so the act is now very specific that despite authorities that might exist in the Local Government Act or Community Charter, those restrictions still exist. So that was part of, I guess you would say, part of the consistency pillar of the Building Act, was to try to deal with some local government bylaws that were seen by industry to be adding to cost of construction, causing delays in construction, et cetera. The other two pillars were sort of the innovation piece, which we'll get to in terms of the rebuild efforts and some of the bylaws that folks are looking to pass or get accepted through the provincial process. The other piece was competency, and so that's not particularly relevant here, but it was just the efforts to have Building Officials Association come under the province, or report to the province, I should say, and establish that formal relationship and have building officials pass standardized exams, et cetera. So because of those restrictions through the Building Act, again, we typically refer to that as Section 5 of the Building Act. If a local government wants to regulate something that is already regulated in the code, there is a process through our act as well for local governments to apply for that variation to the province. And so I guess this is really kind of the innovation pillar of the Building Act, and the helping meet that objective. And obviously a lot of innovation also happens through local government building departments and those approvals, but there are certain innovative projects, you would say, that often fall beyond the scope of what a local government is comfortable with approving. So along those lines, we've done a few tall wood buildings, for instance, that local governments are not necessarily comfortable approving. We've created special regulations for those buildings to permit them to exist, to be constructed. But we also have a process, as I mentioned, through the Building Act, where local governments, if there is something that is restricted because it's already dealt with in the building code, a local government can apply for a variation there. And so a classic example of that is really fire sprinklers. One of the things that happened when we brought in the Building Act was, as a result of Section 5, local governments that had existing fire sprinkler bylaws, which were different from the code, those all got frozen in time. And any new changes to those regulations, or to those bylaws, I should say, or any requests for new fire sprinkler bylaws have to come through the province. So that's just an example of something that's, of course, regulated primarily by the code, but we have some local governments that want to have additional requirements on top of what is required by the code. For instance, I think one or two might require sprinklers in single-family dwellings. More commonly, we have local governments that are requiring sprinklers in some of the larger multifamily buildings that aren't required to have sprinklers under the building code. The other thing I guess I should speak to specifically is energy step code. And I know there was some talk about Lytton requiring higher steps of the step code. And so this does fall under the restrictions that I mentioned. So typically, I guess the sort of starting point would be that it is something, energy efficiency of buildings is something regulated in the code. So local governments would not be able to regulate it despite the authorities in the Local Government Act. However, when we did write the Building Act, and then there's something called the Building Act General Regulation, which sits beneath that. Within that regulation, we define that the matter of energy efficiency is unrestricted for local governments as long as they are referencing a step of the Energy Step Code. So that ability or that authority exists already for local governments to define in a bylaw, we require step 4 or step 5 or whatever it is in this type of building or in all buildings, or however you determine the bylaw should be written and whatever the scope of application should be. So again, that authority exists. The other question that seems to come up was about wildfire protection, or having requirements to protect against wildfire hazard in buildings. And again, this is something that was specifically addressed in the Building Act. And so there is some permission there, although it's reasonably narrowly defined, that gives local government some authority to regulate in this area. So for the purpose of wildfire hazards, a local government can designate a development permit area, and then they can regulate, sorry, I just have to check my notes here, exterior design and finish in relation to wildfire protection. So we'll often see, or typically see, something along the lines of requirements for fire resistant or non-combustible cladding or exteriors of buildings, or roofing requirements and the like. The other topic that has come up as well is flooding. And so again, within the Building Act, so general regulation, where we really do sort of define what items are still in scope for local governments to regulate. Again, there's what we call an unrestriction for buildings in floodplains. So for that issue to be regulated by local governments. And it's not something that is substantially set back, something that is substantially covered within the BC Building Code. So that's, I think, everything I wanted to say as a starting point. And I guess if we're taking questions now, I'd be happy to do that.
I think what we'd like to do perhaps is, if everyone, I think, agreed to this earlier, is have Mr. Deeks go next and then have open the floor for questions. And we can do that following Mr. Deeks' presentation, if that's okay.
Okay, sounds great.
Thanks, Junichi.
All right. Well, hi, everyone. Bob Deeks with RDC Fine Homes. And as Allison noted, I was part of the committee that developed the Energy Step Code, and still sit on the committee as the co-vice chair of the Energy Step Code Committee for the province. I don't have a formal presentation. I wasn't entirely too sure, exactly what people were looking for in this. So I can build on Junichi's comments over the last 15 minutes. I think what would be most appropriate is for me to give you a general overview of what the Energy Step Code is, what some of the requirements are, where it is today, and where it's going. So while it may seem somewhat intuitive based on the title of the Energy Step Code, what this is it's a phased approach to improve energy efficiency in all buildings in the province. And the first formal requirement from the province to engage in higher levels of the step code will happen, I believe, and ministry staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but December of 2022, the province will move to step 3 of the Energy Step Code. And that is moving us from where the current code is now, and the code that we've been building to since about 2010. And it will reflect approximately a 20% improvement in energy efficiency over and above what was built last year. So moving forward, everybody will have to adhere to that Energy Step Code 3 level as per the Building Act, as Junichi had explained to us a little bit earlier. So where are we now? So when the Energy Step Code was introduced to the province a few years ago, municipalities were given the option to engage with the step code anywhere from step 1, technically up to step 3, unless they had demonstrated a capacity to build higher levels of the step through previous requirements in their own bylaws. And so there were a few municipalities that moved very quickly to step 3, and we have seen some municipalities in the province as a result of that experiential component moving to step 4, and particularly in the Lower Mainland. Why has the province created this stepped approach? So the two main pillars behind developing the energy step code was one, to build some capacity in the industry to make sure that the additional professionals, for example, this is a performance-based approach as opposed to what we call a prescriptive-based approach. Prescriptive is, here's a list of things that you must do, and you must do them in exactly this way. Performance-based approach is, here's a library of things that you can choose. You pick what you like, you put it into a software model, and then the software model uses those components that you've chosen to determine whether you comply or don't. And so we've now introduced an additional professional individual to the process called an energy advisor. And so under the BC Energy Step Code, whether you're at step 1 or step 5, the first thing that you do is you hire an energy advisor, or they're referred to as EAs, and they take the design of your house, they plug in the components that influence energy, insulation in walls, insulation in roofs, what sort of heating system you have, what sort of hot water system you have, and that model evaluates the performance of that house. And then based on the measurements of that model, you can determine whether you comply to step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. Capacity was one part of it, and then education, because building in this way, while it's not necessarily hugely more complicated, it is different. And so as we have learned from experiences in the past, when the first energy codes came in the 2000s, the province recognized very quickly that while it necessarily on paper didn't seem that complicated, it created a lot of confusion in the marketplace. We weren't seeing a huge level of success with the adoption of the new code requirements. So the old code was that list of things that you had to do that had an intent to meet a certain level of performance. But when we went and validated the houses that had been built, we discovered that while people were trying their best to follow that prescriptive path, the results really didn't meet what the intent was. And so that really helped inform the province as they went down this road of a stepped approach to say, okay, let's start with something very, very simple. So step 1 is you build exactly the same way that you did in the past, and you are required to use the services of an energy advisor and run an energy model. The outcome of that home is not measured in any specific way, but it is an education process so that people got used to that modeled approach, and they could start to understand, the level of success that they had. Yay, I hit a home run and I met the step level 1, or I exceeded step level 1, or oops, I didn't quite get there. I thought that based on the list of things I knew how to do, I was going to get there, but now I can see where I failed, and that creates a learning outcome for me so that the next time I do it, I can get better. And, part of, the stepped approach is really just getting better and recognizing it's going to take the industry a while to learn how to get better. Hence, we have this stepped approach. And of course, we've had the opportunity as a province, municipality to municipality, to engage in the Energy Step Code, I think now for going on to 4 years. And so particularly in the Lower Mainland, many of the municipalities have dipped their toe in and have engaged in anywhere from step 1, as I said, to step 4, to really make sure that they've got the capacity for those specialty professionals like the energy advisors, that the materials that we need to build these higher performing houses are readily available, And one of the benefits of informing us of where the future of energy efficiency is going to go is we have seen the domestic innovation and production of things like high performance windows. The Lower Mainland, I think, has 5 window manufacturers now who build to the highest level of performance in the window industry. And so that, for those of us that are already building to that level, it gives us a local supplier of those high performance products. We're not having to go to Europe or somewhere else and incur all that additional cost. So, we've seen this stepped approach at work, and we have seen both significant increase in capacity as well as, I think, industry leading education opportunities. And so the province is really moving, I think, very comfortably to be ready to adopt step 3 next year. So what are some of the other advantages that you get from an energy step code house? Because so much of the discussion is focused on energy. So energy savings, energy savings, energy savings. And absolutely, step 3 over and above the 2010 code is likely to save about 20% on your energy bills. But of course, if we look at houses that were built pre-2010, pre-2000, pre-1990, we could be seeing 50, 60, 70% improvements in energy efficiency over that older housing stock. And so there really is, a financial benefit to building to those higher steps. But beyond that, there are also some other significant benefits. So thermal comfort, a house being evenly warm in all the rooms in the winter, and then thermal comfort in the summertime, better insulation levels, better sealed houses can help houses stay cooler. And of course, the systems, particularly in an area where you rely on electrification for all of your needs, and you need electric heating and cooling. There are, very innovative modern heating systems that also provide air conditioning at the same time. And so by engaging in those high performance heating systems, such as in a cold climate air source heat pump, not only will you have a much more comfortable house in the wintertime with much lower energy bills, but it'll also provide air conditioning in the summertime to provide that comfortable environment all 4 seasons. And then of course, because we're better insulating our houses, we're sealing them up in a more effective way to prevent all those drafts and that energy loss. And we're putting in a whole home ventilation system that improves the indoor air quality in the house with filtration. So of course, after living with COVID for 18 months, I think people are becoming a lot more focused on the indoor air quality of their homes, and the levels of the step code will enforce better ventilation and better indoor air quality. So where we are today is essentially, if municipalities choose, and there are certainly a number of municipalities in the province that are still using the original energy code. They haven't made any changes. They haven't engaged with the step code. As I noted, December 2022, Energy Step Code 3, 20% better, will start to be enforced. And then in 2027, we would, I may have 2027, I believe the province's intent today, and this is the intent today, doesn't mean that things won't change, is to move to Energy Step Code 4. And then in 2032, the intent is to move to Step Code 5. And you may have heard the term net zero or a net zero house talked about. Step 5 is also referred to as net zero. What does net zero mean? Well, net zero can mean a house that could produce as much energy as it uses. It would produce energy through energy generation on the roof, or what we would commonly refer to as solar panels. And so the model, the HOT 2000 model that would typically be used, it's not the only model, but it's the one that's most commonly used in Canada. It was invented in Canada. The house as modeled would determine if the energy use in the model would be equal to the amount of roof area that was available for solar panels. Now, that that's the direction we're heading. It doesn't necessarily mean that's where we're going to land, because what you might also have heard and fairly recently through the Clean BC plan is a focus now on carbon. And so when we talk about energy efficiency, we're specifically talking about the carbon that we emit through the operation of our house. One of the things that, my company has really started to understand is the other carbon equation is how much carbon do we use when we build our house? And it's a balance between it will become, and this, this is more me speaking. I'm going to take my co-vice chair hat off here and speak, a little more personally as where I see, us going. The discussion around carbon is increasing almost every day. And we are both as a nation and a province and as a community worldwide starting to really understand, how we burn carbon, where does it come from? And, for us here in the province, it's going to be about a balance between the carbon investment we make in building our houses and the carbon savings that we get through our operation. Some of the data that we now see through the home builders and the research that the Net Zero Council is doing nationally is that the sweet spot potentially is somewhere in the mid-step range. I'm not going to put a number to it, but it's going to be in the mid-range there. So if I now continue with my RDC Fine Homes hat, if I'm talking to you as clients, my advice to you would be to get ready and be prepared to engage with step 3. And be patient because it is important that the community who builds your houses has an opportunity to understand how to do this properly, that there is some time to educate everybody. And so I would not be in a rush right now to jump to step 4 or jump to step 5. Certainly our experience, and we're in the same climate zone as you guys. My house is in Whistler. We build the whole corridor from North Vancouver up to Pemberton, which is, which climate zone 4, warmer climate in Vancouver, climate zone 5, a little bit colder in Squamish, climate zone 6 in Whistler, colder still, and Lytton is in climate zone 6. And we have found that we can qualify homes under CHBA's net zero label at around step 4. The measurement criteria between the CHBA label and the provincial energy step code 5 are different. And so you can't necessarily compare them that way, but we can demonstrate that at step 4, we are reaching a very, very high level of energy performance that on a typical build would create enough roof area such that the model would deem that the house could produce as much energy as it uses. So I think I'll stop there. I appreciate that's an enormous amount of information, and quite possibly I have now confused everybody. But, I am here for questions.
No worries. Thank you so much. So I'd like to invite committee members at this point to either enter your questions in the chat or raise your hands. There is a question pending from Sheila McGuire. The question is, are the step codes the same for commercial buildings as personal dwellings? And Janichi or Mr. Deeks, if you could respond, that would be great.
I can. It's pretty. The step code is different. So the building code is divided into 2 components. One for houses. It's called houses and small buildings. So small commercial buildings can fall into the same code requirement as houses. And then bigger, larger commercial buildings, office towers, warehouses, factories, large retail operations would be under part 3. And the energy requirements and how you achieve those standards are different, and the number of steps are different as well.
Thank you very much. Jesua has her hand up. Jesua.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I think this is for our first speaker. It's a lot to digest, but
I believe we are
understood-
recording the meeting, by the way, just so you know, that you'll be able to come and revisit if you'd like as well.
That will be helpful for sure. But if I understood him correctly, he said there's a process for local government to apply for variance. And I think he was referring to materials. If there's a material in the that isn't currently accepted by Canada or the province, is it possible that we can be a test cycle or test site for it? And I'm thinking in particular of autoclaved aerated cement, concrete block, which is used in the United States and various other countries, but at this point it's not in Canada, and it's fire resistance, and there's a lot of good qualities about it. So is it a possibility?
Yeah, I can probably answer that. So the regulations, or sort of the process that I was describing that we would, or that the local government would use to apply to us, would be to regulate something or require something that isn't already required by the code. So for instance, if the approach was to say everyone must use that particular material in their rebuild, that would be more like the type of thing that you would come to the province for that variation. If it's permission to use a certain material, that is typically just done at a local level by the local building official as what we call an alternative solution. So within the building code, there's already a permission to use alternative products or methods, so long as they meet the same level of performance as is required by the code. So if the approach is, we want people to be able to use that material, then there's already a process in place that would typically run through your local building official.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. I know we do have a couple of questions in the chat. I did notice Noni's hand went up before those questions were received. I also know we have about 20 minutes left. If anyone is comfortable staying on an extra half an hour, I think it's important to get all our questions answered. So if everybody's okay with that, I think we should just continue on. But Noni, if you could go ahead.
Thank you. When you were talking about education and how this is all new, and how when you first introduced the step code, people were a little bit, particularly builders, were kind of like, okay, since when do we have to do it like this? So I'm thinking, if I was a homeowner, someone looking for a contractor right now to rebuild my home, what kind of information and education programs are out there right now for people to be able to advise themselves and educate themselves about this process that you're describing? When, like, if I'm from Lytton and I don't know where the hell I'm going to find my contractor, but I got to find somebody, and I got to make sure that I find this other guy that is the energy advisor guy. And then, of course, there's none of that in Lytton. And so the whole picture starts getting very muddy and very confused very fast. So whereabouts in all of this is the calm everything down and say, no, just a second, here's how this is going to work. And it's not that big a deal. It's just this and that. I can see, just like if it was me, I'd be getting frustrated and ready to give up real fast.
Okay, good questions. So there has been education available for builders in the province for the last 4 years, specifically in the Energy Step Code. I think I've delivered 4 or 5 seminars on this in the Lower Mainland over the last 4 or 5 years. BC Housing has put out quite a few publications around building science and building practices to build energy efficient buildings. One thing you may not be aware of, but in the province of British Columbia, we are somewhat unique in North America in that builders are required to be licensed, and to maintain their license, they're required to take continuing professional development. And so they have to achieve a certain number of professional development credits every year. And so quite a few builders over the last few years will have been taking education to get them up to speed on the Energy Step Code, and trying to understand for themselves what's the most cost-effective way to get there. While it's not in place now, the province is moving to a mandatory education component for builder licensing around the energy step code. I'm actually on the committee that is putting together the course curriculum, and that'll get rolled out next year. So as we move forward, all the builders who don't have demonstrated experience building to a high performance level previously will all be required to take that training, so that as the higher levels of the step code are rolled out through the province, there is assurance that all 8,000 licensed builders will have a better understanding of how to do this. And then with regard to energy advisors, an energy advisor does not have to live in your town. All the work that they do can be done at their desk, whether they live in Vancouver or Prince George or Victoria. And then there is a test that needs to be done on the home at completion. Typically you do it twice, an air tightness test. And there are mobile EAs that are, in Kamloops, Vernon, Kelowna, Abbotsford, who would quite easily make the trip for the day to do that test for the rebuild.
Thank you very much. We have a question in the chat. What about modular homes? Are modular builders required to build to step 3 or more?
Yes. So, well, Janichi, do you want to take that, because a modular builder can build to a CSA standard.
Right.
I believe they would still have to comply with the final performance requirements under the step code, though.
So there'd be a little bit of, I guess, leeway depending on how a municipality or a regional district has written their bylaw. But essentially, if it's a mobile home, they will typically conform to a certain CSA standard called Z240. And if they're meeting that standard, they're actually exempt from the building code, because that standard itself is basically like a different version of a building code. So in terms of energy requirements, there's that path, and that standard does include some energy requirements within it. So from a pure building code compliance perspective, a building that meets that standard is interpreted to meet the building code. However, different municipal or regional district bylaws are written in different ways. And so, for instance, I'm aware of some bylaws that say all residential buildings have to meet step code level X, in which case I think you'd have to comply with that bylaw. And so the CSA standard doesn't necessarily help you comply with that bylaw. There's also a distinction that should be made between what I would call mobile or manufactured homes versus modular. And so there are homes also that are, sort of prefabricated panels or partially prefabricated. Those ones do still have to meet the building code. So it's another CSA standard that sort of, there's a quality standard for factories building modular homes that get assembled on site. Those homes will still have to meet the building code, the BC building code. So that standard is not its own sort of standalone code. But again, once they come on site, they would be subject to the municipal bylaw or the regional district bylaw that's in place. So it would depend on how Lytton writes that bylaw. And for other jurisdictions, it'll depend on how their bylaw is written.
Thank you very much, Janichi. Another question. How long does it take for an energy advisor to let you know if you are compliant?
It has more to do with their capacity and schedule than it does the time to run the model. It's less than a day's work for them to input all the details from your building plans into the model to determine what the energy standard might be. The smaller the house, the shorter the timeline, the bigger and more complex the house, the longer it'll take, but it is a relatively short exercise.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions. Does anyone, any other committee members have questions? Okay. Oh, I think I see Noni's hand up, or maybe not. Oh, I see. There she is.
And I didn't press enter or something. So what about if it's an owner built home? Is there anywhere on this whole thing for somebody to build their own home, or is it just like this, as long as you follow the 75-page booklet, you're good to go?
So to be an owner builder, there is a formal exam that the owner needs to take to identify that they understand the basics around home building. And so, and there are some courses that you can take to prepare you to write the exam. So if you've passed the exam, then you comply to build your own home under the exemption for an owner builder. Then you would follow exactly the same strategies as a builder would to comply with whatever step code is required within your municipal jurisdiction.
So it doesn't matter if you were a builder in the past and you've been out of it for a while, it doesn't matter, you still got to take the test.
Well, yes. Yeah, unless you wanted to go and get a license. So to become a licensed builder, if you had a previous experience building, you can do a different type of test that would deem that you had the experience to comply as a licensed builder, and then you could become a licensed builder. You'd have to have a look at either one to determine what the easiest path might be.
Oh,
But
yeah.
also recognizing that if you're a homeowner builder, you really do have to be engaged in the construction of your own home. You can't be an owner builder and then go find somebody else who comes in and builds it for you.
Okay, yeah, so that's assuming that you take on the role of the contractor there then.
Yeah, you would be the project manager and the general contractor.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
And I'll just add that those programs that Mr. Deeks was referencing, those are all requirements that are administered through BC Housing through their licensing and consumer services.
Perfect. I did post the website for BC Housing in the chat. There's some great resources and research there on that website. Patsy Getsy, you have a question. Oh, yeah, I think you're on mute.
There we go. Can you hear me then? I'm wondering about building inspectors. So when the rebuild starts, we're going to be needing a myriad of building inspectors, it would seem to me. Otherwise, it's going to take forever. So I wonder, are there even enough building inspectors? I hear there's a shortage. I don't know if that's a question for you folks or not, but do you have any comments on that?
I mean, that would really fall back to your municipal jurisdiction and how you would decide to process the permit applications, because you can find third parties that could do that for you. And then, of course, it would be a local building inspector who would be in charge of doing the physical inspections on site. And yeah, that's a question for the municipality to really address, I believe.
And this is a little bit outside of our scope in our office because this stuff is primarily dealt with under different acts that we're not responsible for. But my understanding is that local governments have authority to enforce the codes, and that they have authority to determine how they do that, how they administer that, right? So what you'll see different local governments with varying levels of capacity, of course. City of Vancouver or Richmond or Burnaby obviously has a much larger capacity than say Lytton might, or some other small towns, right? And so local governments, to my understanding, are enabled to determine how they enforce the code. And so another example there is that, in one jurisdiction, there may be 10 inspections throughout the course of construction. but in another jurisdiction, there might be 5 or 7, right? So they might be doing inspections at different times and for different purposes. So I think there's, as far as I understand, and the town would want to consult with probably with their legal counsel when writing the bylaw. But my understanding is there'd be quite a bit of leeway there to determine what the processes would be.
Thank you very much, Junichi. Mr. Hogan has a question.
Yeah, my question was just where in BC is this code really working to the community's advantage and where it's working well?
Well, I suppose I can speak personally on the South Coast corridor here. I think it's working very well. I don't think we see really any significant failure in terms of complying. This is sort of a two-part equation. One, we're trying to address our climate change goals and reducing our carbon. So we are steadily moving to a place where we will reduce our operational emissions through building more energy efficient buildings. That absolutely there is hard evidence that shows how much carbon we save through that operational energy savings. And then, of course, as I noted when I was talking, there are some significant benefits here to the homeowners in terms of a better built house. And one of the ways that I describe this is you could take your 1970 Volkswagen Beetle and compare it to a modern day Volkswagen Golf, and that's kind of the difference between that 1980s or 1990s house and an Energy Step Code 3 house.
Thanks.
I guess I would add to that. It was mentioned earlier that right now the step code is voluntary, and so what we have, I think we have about 55 or so jurisdictions that have voluntarily adopted the step code at different levels. So some will be, so primarily probably around the step 2 or 3 mark, and so I think that is sort of demonstrates that there is, some success out there because a lot of municipalities have voluntarily adopted this. And I think Mr. Deeks also mentioned that when the codes introduced these sort of complex energy requirements, the prescriptive requirements, we actually had a position in our office for about 1.5 years for somebody to support builders, industry, local governments in enforcing and complying with those requirements, because the prescriptive requirements can actually be quite complex. They can be limiting and they can be quite complex. And so it was actually out of that experience of trying to comply with these new national energy code requirements that the idea for the step code was born, just to give people a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more choice, and to create something that was just a little bit simpler to comply with. And I think we've been successful with that.
Thank you so much.
I just add that I think those 55 municipalities contribute to close to 80% of the new buildings in the province. So I think we have a pretty good track record so far.
Wonderful. I know that Ron Machuzi has his hand raised, but I want to make sure we have all the committee members' questions answered. The one question, can step 3 for or net zero be attained with wood heat?
Yes, I believe it can. Wood is deemed as a carbon neutral fuel too.
Great. Nice short and sweet answer. What are the cost implications for the various steps?
Well, there's $1 million question. Not that it costs $1 million. There is some hard data that the province has created that is there to try and guide and help inform people around the differences in cost for what they call a typical archetypical building that you can find, and possibly Allison, you can get that from the Step Code Council or off the website, and distribute to the members that will give them some idea of, what a house in climate zone 6, what the additional cost might be. It is very specific to the type of house you build, the strategies the builder brings to the table, the experiential component, having a good energy advisor, all those things will come into it. My tips for this is the easiest path to step 3 is buy the best windows you can and get the lowest air tightness result possible. And then it is possible that a typical house with 2x6 walls, R22 in the walls, typical roof with typical fiberglass bats will comply. So step 3 can be quite easy if you follow some simple guidelines in how you build and how you strategize it.
Thank you very much. Oh,
Just
sorry.
want to add briefly, sorry, Allison, just to mention that, something that also factors in for me anyway, as sort of a real person living in the real world is month-to-month cost, right? And there's sometimes a resistance to look at payback periods for energy efficiency measures. But, for myself, I think it's a very practical way to look at things. And one of the huge benefits you get from an energy efficient house is, of course, month-to-month savings. So myself, I put in a heat pump, for example, into my old 70s house, and the savings for me were huge. That thing paid itself off within 2 years because I was on oil heating previously, which, I spent a couple $1,000s the first year I was here in oil heating. So a lot of these measures can be quite cost effective if you're thinking about your month-to-month cost as well.
And then, my other comment is, well, there's lots of cool new stuff out there. You don't need it to comply. All the products you need to build a resilient, fire smart house, energy efficient fire smart house are available on the shelf at Home Depot or Rona or your local building supply store. And so while it's attractive to look at new technology and cool stuff, having been down that road more times than I care to remember, keep it simple, simple strategies, simple building designs, simple mechanical systems. If you really don't need air conditioning, which, may not be the case in Lytton, but, we have got super energy efficient houses that use electric baseboard heat. It's super cheap to install. And because you've reduced your heating load so enormously, they actually don't come on very often. Or wood stove with electric baseboard heat backup. Those are my strongest message is when you look to rebuild and you look to design, stay with stuff that's conventional and simple, off the shelf, because it works.
Thank you so much. Mr. Hogan, you have your hand up. Was there a new question you had? Oh, sorry, I just saw the hand go down.
Sorry about that.
That's okay, no worries.
What I was going to ask for the other people that are on the discussion today is, do they see that magazine that's given to the municipalities called Municipal World? Because there's been some great articles in there about like blazing the path to net zero, and there's other articles that talk about the energy of different communities and those kind of things. I'm just wondering if people do make use of those magazines that are delivered to the village and whatnot.
Allison, I don't believe that the village of Lytton actually gets them. Or we'll have to find that out, but that's a very good point, because if there's information in there that we can pass on to our residents, that would be great. Yeah.
I believe that's a subscription, Chair Leach, so you guys would have to subscribe to it. There is a cost for it, I believe.
Okay, well, it might be something to look into, because if it helps everybody, then that would be well worth the money spent.
I also put in the website for the Energy Step Code into the chat. So if anyone would like to do additional research, that is the BC Energy Step Code website. Were there any other questions or comments before I turn it back over to Chair Leach? Oh, one more question. How will a district energy system help net zero? Is there an advantage to it?
I can jump on that one first. I'll just come back to my comment of keep it simple. Simple systems. District energy is expensive to design. It's expensive to install. And when you talk about heating systems, you are designing a house that is energy efficient. It doesn't use very much heat. So don't spend a ton of money on a fancy heating system. And then, you know, for a municipality, if you put in a district energy system, everybody owns it. Everybody's responsible for it. Everybody's got to pay for it. Everybody's got to pay to maintain it. If you have your own self-contained energy systems, it's the responsibility of the individual owners, and it gives them flexibility to do what they want to do best.
Perfect. Thank you. Mr. Hogan.
I think in regards to the district energy thing too, something that could be looked at is a district heating thing where, say, if you look at what happened to the city of Merritt, where their wastewater and everything's ending up going into the Nicola River. And we know a lot of cities are having trouble knowing what to do with their effluent and that type of thing. There could be the potential to turn that into heat and using that to offset some other things. So there should be work done in that area of knowing what you're going to be doing with your wastes. And so I think that comes with some of this net zero planning as well. When you look at the amount of water we use in our houses, and some of the gray water from your shower and laundry should be actually used to flush your toilet rather than it adding to the waste stream before being used to its full potential, kind of thing. Because we're going to get droughts.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of resilience, looking at water strategies and water management is a great way to go. And there are good off-the-shelf systems to collect rainwater and use that rainwater for things like toilets and laundry. Proven systems that people can look at. Absolutely.
And we went through an exercise, I think it was probably about 10 years ago, within the building code to try to remove any barriers that were in there to water reuse. So there's definitely still some challenges in terms of, you know, making sure water is safe for consumption and dealing with some of those types of contamination issues. But from a code perspective, we've done what we think we can to remove barriers for that type of system.
Thank you very much. I will give it back to Chair Leach here in a minute, but I wanted to make sure there wasn't any other questions that anyone had. If you'd like to raise your hand or just unmute yourselves, please feel free. Okay. Seeing none, I will turn it back over to Chair Leach, but thank you so much to our guests, Junichi Jensen and Bob Deeks, for their wealth of knowledge and passing some of it along to us today. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us, taking the time to join us today, and hopefully our residents learned a lot. I know I have, and thank you for all the information that you've given us. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're on to number 3.3. So we're on to number 3.3, which is
thanks everybody.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye now. So we're going to move on to 3.3, and Jesua brought this up earlier as a late item about comments, and I'm going to turn over to you, Jesua.
Okay, thank you. I was just thinking earlier today that probably the whole group could benefit by having the building bylaw forwarded, but I see that our chairperson has said that he will do that. And if there were any notes from the presenters, I was hoping that those could also be forwarded. And I'm a bit technologically challenged at this point because I'm working off an iPad and an iPhone that don't talk to each other. So I have no way to print stuff. So, but I'm wondering if Allison, I know she has a big workload, but I'm wondering if Allison could send that as well as the recovery plan. I know it's in one of my streams somewhere way back there, but if it all could come forward at the same time, I'll try to save
So
it somewhere.
you'd like me to send the interim recovery plan and
The Lytton building bylaw that will be coming up.
right.
And if there's any presenter notes or contacts, if it could all be in one email, that would be helpful.
Sure.
Okay.
No
Yeah,
problem.
we should get the building bylaw sent to the committee members as soon as we can, because it is a bit of a read. And then I want to give you, lots of time to actually read it over. And like I said earlier, this is a draft bylaw, so your input is very important on this, because I take your input and your information to council to discuss that. So we definitely want all your input into this, and it's a draft bylaw. I can't stress that enough, that it's not written in stone at this point. And very much appreciate all your opinions. Sheila.
Yeah, I would just like to add, sorry, I don't know if I have my mic on. I
Yep,
don't know how
you're
to
good.
use my mic on this thing. I don't know how to use my mic and my earbuds. They're different. I just wanted to add that I think it might be beneficial as well, that if we could have a look at the current provincial building code to see what's different in the current provincial one to what's being proposed.
Absolutely. And in the chat box, I've included the links to both the STEP code and to the BC housing, and all of the legislation, current code, everything is on there. But I can find the specific link and send that to you as
Okay.
well, if you would like.
Maybe we can
I
set
would.
a whole. Go ahead, Sheila.
Sorry, is it available, Allison, is it available to everybody?
Yes, it's public. Yeah,
It's public on that link? Okay.
sure
But
is. Yeah,
I think it'd be beneficial to have them all at the same time.
absolutely. Yeah, I can do that.
That's
Okay,
what I was just going to
thanks.
say. We can send an email that has everything all together, so you have a lot to read.
I'll
Go ahead,
include a link
Jesua.
to the Building Act as well.
Okay.
I was
Jesua?
going to ask Robert if
sorry.
he sends
Go
that.
ahead, Scott.
I was going to ask you, Robert, if you send that to us, if you could highlight all the sections that are sort of controversial and where residents have made comments about them already. So then we could focus in on that and see if there's solutions to that or getting the better answers back to those residents.
Allison, we can get together and kind of go through the bylaw and actually highlight. Can we
Yeah.
not? Okay,
I believe
we will
so.
do that for you.
That
Yeah.
might be a question for Lori and the CAO, but
Okay,
certainly we can take that offline for sure.
okay. Jesua.
Thank you. There was one other issue I wanted to bring up if we're done with the materials we want. And I hesitate again to bring it forward, but I watched the meeting earlier today.
Mhm.
The leadership policy and recovery, and during that you talked about alternates for this committee.
That's correct, yeah.
And I was a little bit concerned that I didn't think it reflected what I heard at our last meeting, and perhaps I didn't hear accurately. That could be a possibility. But when you presented it to that group, I thought you were saying that this committee had forwarded specific names for consideration. And my recollection of this committee is that we talked about not having alternates when someone had to miss the occasional meeting. But if an appointment was necessary, it would be made. But we didn't talk about any specific candidates. And so I have no problem with the candidates you put forward. But this is odd because usually I champion women's inclusion in boards. But today I'm going to champion men's inclusion on boards because they do have different perspectives. And generally, I mean, it's all general, right? They tend to be more analytical and practical. And it just adds to a fuller view of the topic. They have different lifestyle and skill set and a knowledge base than some of us that haven't been out in the workforce. So I would ask that Ross Urquhart be added to that list because Ross has lived in our community for 50 years. He was on village council. He was on the Chamber of Commerce. He worked with the Highways Department. He developed the walking tour of our community. And I know that he has expressed interest. So if you're bringing names forward, I would ask for him to be included. Actually, you know, here I'm going back on the women's side. I don't know everybody that was appointed or that put in a volunteer request, but I do know one other one, and that's Karen Hogan. And Karen Hogan was born in Lytton, raised her children in Lytton, lost her home, lost her family home, worked for the village and various other agencies. So I guess I would ask that those two be added to the list, or that there is no list presented, that you just say when a vacancy becomes available, we will look at the people that put their submitted their names. Don't want to be picky, but I think we have to be
It's
really clear.
That's okay. I'll give you some answers. Okay, so the alternate list is if someone decides that they can't do a long-term commitment, and that they you know, as time goes on, maybe something comes up in their life and they don't want to be part of the committee and they wish to leave the committee, this would be the list of names to replace them. The reason why I chose those names is when we first put out that everybody that wants to be on the committee put their name forward, those names came up, and I chose them because the answers that they were giving me and the detail of what they wanted to do was in their emails. They were very dedicated to be part of the committee, so I thought they would be the best fit. And I'm sorry I didn't get to everyone, but basically it really depended on how they responded, why they wanted to be on the committee. And I thought that if you're really dedicated and you have a good drive to be on the committee, then that's why I picked those names. Hopefully that helps the answer as well.
Okay,
And there
that's
was
good.
no, yeah, go ahead.
But when I listened in on the meeting today, it seemed to portray that this committee had forwarded those names. And that is not accurate. It was the chair putting those names forward, not this committee. So just to be clear, because every time we say something and then it gets twisted or managed a certain way, the public trust falls. And so I think clarity is important, that when you present these, you can say you as the chair present these numbers, but I as a committee member didn't hear anything about it, made no decision about it. And I hope you would not portray that.
The reference is to the LPR committee, the Leadership and Policy Review Committee. It would be a recommendation from them I put forward the names, they would pass the motion, and then I would bring that to council. So that's the committee that I'm referring to. That's where
Okay.
originally this committee started out of that committee. So that's why I brought it up during that committee meeting today.
Okay, good luck.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Patsy?
Robert,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry, Patsy had her hand up. Sheila, I'll get to you. Patsy?
Okay, all right.
Oh, you have to unmute.
I'm in an echo chamber here. I'm just wondering about the future speakers. I didn't feel quite like I had enough time to figure out what these guys were actually going to talk about. So I was just wondering if we had some kind of outline of what the future speakers may be bringing, information they may be bringing to us, if that might help me do my research better.
Yeah, thank you, Patsy. That was one of the things that I brought up actually at the Leadership and Policy Review Committee today. Was I want to sit down with our new CEO and our recovery manager and go over the next, months ahead. What is the committee's going to be doing? Who are we going to bring in to give more, give you more of a chance to actually review more material, get to know more people as the speakers become available. Today was just an introduction to the building bylaw, to the Building Act and the building step codes, but we will move forward with more information for you as we become more organized with the committee.
And we
Sheila.
want to ensure also that the committee members get all of the information they want. So what that means is if we want to bring Janichi and Mr. Deeks back, we're happy to do that. They are available to us. And if you would like to see them back at another meeting to clarify or to ask more questions, I'm sure that would be no problem at all.
Okay, Sheila.
I was just wondering if you could tell us those names for the alternates.
Cleanne Cloghlin, Angela Brown, and Karen Kimball. I'll also be announcing them at council tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Jesua, did you want to add anything else to your comments here?
No, I think that did it, but I think it would be good to have the regular agenda at the end. So we can.
Sorry, I think you're breaking up. Can you repeat that?
I have nothing else to add.
Okay.
But
okay.
I think it would be good to have it as a regular agenda at the end of our meeting, so committee members can bring up requests.
I'm not sure if I caught all of that again. Maybe I'm having a connection problem, or
I think maybe it's me.
I think what Jesua was saying that she would like the agenda to be brought out so committee members are able to make requests.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, moving forward, I'll put out an email so that if you want to add somebody that you have that you want to talk, or you want an issue, or something comes up, I will give you the opportunity. It's just that we're just starting right now, so I just wanted to line up a couple things, but once we get going, you'll have lots of input. Yeah, absolutely. Jesua.
I'll try one more time and hopefully you can understand.
Sure.
I think it would be good with the last item on every agenda we have, just blanket requests and comments. Sure.
Oh, I see. Sort of like in the agenda, you want to add an opportunity at the end for everybody just to make a comment or something. Okay, got it. I got it. Okay, Noni.
I think someone needs to mute their phone. There's somebody in the background that has some things going on that's not muted.
I think it's Patsy. Thanks, Patsy. My question is relating to all of this talk about where we're going and what we're doing. So I would really appreciate for this committee a sense of more of a long-term plan and the kind of steps that you see us taking to get there. I'm that kind of person. I need to know where I'm headed with all of this, not just so much what I'm doing this week with it, but where the whole thing is taking us. So for me, I thought we were following the draft recovery plan, and then that was kind of the structure that we were basing all of this stuff in somehow. And so for me, I need to see how each agenda item fits into that. And that's why we're doing this, because we can go off in a million directions with this group, and it would be really easy to do that. But if we can kind of, and just for me, I don't know, maybe other people might appreciate it too, just to kind of see, all right, so this is where we're headed, and this is the first steps, and these are the things that are going to come next, and things will get added to that, but a kind of long-term plan. Because, and the other thing is how often we're going to meet in order to address these important issues. Like some of these are really time-sensitive things we're talking about. And so there's kind of a juggle, a balance that needs to happen here. And I'm just thanking Jessica for the time to take a minute at the end of the meeting and kind of maybe air out some of those points that people might have thought about that weren't really addressed in the agenda. So thank you.
Sure, yeah, so that's the meeting that I want to have with the new CAO and the recovery manager to develop that long-term plan. So at least we have a kind of a guidance on where we're going to talk about things, when we're going to talk about them. And in regards to time sensitive, at any time if the committee wants to call a special meeting, I am more than welcome to do all requested at any time. Just let me know. And because I know that we may need more time with the draft building bylaw here, and you may want to have speakers come back again. So we want to make sure that you all have the opportunity, and given the situation, we may want to have more meetings than just every 2 weeks. Absolutely. Okay, anybody else have any comments or concerns? Okay, so thank you to everyone, and thank you for your questions. It's 5:23, and I will adjourn this meeting. So thank you so much. Our next meeting is December 15th in 2 weeks.
Good night, all. Thanks.
Good night.
What time at next week?
It's the same time, 4 o'clock.
On the 15th?
It's 4 o'clock on December 15th. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank
Nice
you.
to see everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye now.